What if I told you an empire fought wars for 600 years straight and somehow never went broke doing it? While modern governments can't balance a budget for 6 months, these guys were out here conquering continents and still turning a profit. Let's set the scene. 6 centuries, hundreds of wars, kings, sultans, crusaders, rebels, rising European powers. The Ottomans fought them all. From the hills of the Balkans to the deserts of Arabia, their army kept marching. And through all of it, all the blood, all the chaos, all the campaigns, they did something almost no other empire in history pulled off. They didn't go bankrupt. The Ottoman Empire ran from around 1299 to 1922. That's longer than the Roman Empire, longer than the British Empire, longer than basically any state we talk about in the modern world. But here's the thing. Longevity alone isn't the interesting part. The interesting part is how. How does an empire that's basically always at war not collapse financially? Western audiences tend to think empires fall because they lose battles, but that's not really how it works, is it? Battles don't bankrupt nations. Budgets do, leaders do, logistics do. The Ottomans figured this out early. Instead of copying Europe's model, tax the people, pay the soldiers, repeat until broke, they built something far more elegant. A machine where war didn't drain the treasury. War was the treasury. Before we get into the mechanics, let's get one thing straight, because most people in the West have a very fuzzy picture of what the Ottoman Empire actually was. Turbans, domes, janissaries, maybe you've seen a show or two, but the centuries-long financial engine running underneath all that, almost nobody talks about it. So let's slow down and actually look. It started small, like embarrassingly small. The Ottomans began as a tiny frontier principality in northwest Anatolia led by a warlord named Osman, a guy with a few thousand riders and apparently excellent timing. The Byzantine Empire was crumbling. Mongol power was retreating from the Near East, and Osman's crew was perfectly positioned to step into the vacuum. Here's what most history books skip over, though. Those early victories weren't just military wins. They were financial wins. Every new piece of territory meant land, crops, trade routes, and, most importantly, new populations to tax. From the very beginning, warfare wasn't a cost, it was an income stream. Think about that for a second. Every battle that went well was essentially a business acquisition. By 1326, the Ottomans had taken Bursa. By the 1350s, they'd crossed into Europe, and at that point, they weren't a frontier tribe anymore. They were the power sitting directly on top of the trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. In medieval economics, that's like owning the only highway between two major cities. Everybody has to go through you. Everybody pays the toll. Silk from China? Pay the Ottomans. Spices from India? Pay the Ottomans. Venetian merchants, Arab traders, Balkan caravans, all of them, every single one passed through the Ottoman toll gate. War needs three things: food, metal, and men. The Ottomans didn't necessarily have more of these than their neighbors, but they had cash flow, constant, reliable, geographic-backed cash flow, and that changes everything, doesn't it? Now, a strong revenue base alone still doesn't explain 6 centuries of military campaigns, because almost every empire has had revenue, and most of them still collapsed. What made the Ottomans different was structural. They designed a financial system that turned the army itself into a self-financing institution. This is where things get genuinely brilliant, and this is where we meet one of the most important and misunderstood innovations in Ottoman history: the Timar system. Imagine you're running a government and you want to build an army, but you absolutely, positively do not want to pay them. Sounds ridiculous, right? But the Ottomans actually pulled it off. Here's how it worked. Instead of giving soldiers a salary, the state gave them rights. A Timar was essentially a tax district. A cavalry soldier, called a sipai, received the right to collect taxes from a specific village or region. In exchange, he had to equip himself, maintain his horse, and show up ready for battle when called. No salary. He funded himself. Let that sink in for a moment. The soldier isn't costing the empire money. The soldier is managing revenue on the empire's behalf, keeping a cut, and staying combat ready on his own expense. It's one of the most ingenious pieces of financial engineering in world history. The state's expenses dropped dramatically. The soldier became personally invested in keeping his local villages stable and productive, because stable villages meant stable tax income for him. The peasants lived under a consistent local authority, and the empire had an army that could mobilize quickly without touching the central treasury. Compare that to Europe at the same time, where kings were hiring expensive knights and mercenaries who demanded payment up front. If the king ran out of gold, the soldiers ran out of loyalty. Mutinies were basically a subscription service. The Ottomans didn't have that problem. Their army's funding flowed whether the empire was at war or at peace. And when war came, it didn't strain the budget. It activated the system. But the Temar system was only one piece of the puzzle. The second piece is something most people recognize by name, but very few actually understand. The Janissaries. These were the elite infantry corps, the soldiers that foreign powers feared, Christians resented, and sultans trusted more than their own brothers. Professionally trained, disciplined from youth, and loyal not to a clan or a region, but to the state alone. In medieval terms, they were roughly equivalent to modern special forces, if your special forces were also monks and had no family to go home to. But financially, the really remarkable thing was how the empire acquired them. The Janissaries came from the devshirme system, often called the child levy. In Christian villages across the Balkans, boys were selected, taken from their families, converted to Islam, and raised in the empire's military schools. They were trained, educated, and shaped into soldiers who owed their entire identity and loyalty to the Ottoman state. Now, the ethics here are not comfortable, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. It was a coercive system, full stop. But if we're analyzing the financial logic, it accomplished something extraordinary. The empire acquired elite, fully trained adult soldiers without bearing the lifetime cost of raising them from infancy. The biological families, the conquered populations, had already absorbed the cost of childhood. The empire stepped in at adulthood and took the finished product. Once in service, the Janissaries were paid and housed, but in their early centuries, they couldn't marry or own private businesses, which kept them financially and politically loyal to the state alone. So, put it together. The Timar system gave you a self-funded cavalry. The Janissary system gave you a highly efficient, low-cost professional infantry. Combined, you have a military machine that saves the empire enormous amounts of money across centuries. But even that wasn't enough to explain the full picture. The real genius was something bigger, making sure that war paid for the next war. Every time the Ottomans conquered new territory, they didn't just gain land, they gained new taxpayers, new Timar districts, new trade routes, new ports, and entirely new revenue streams. Every conquest financially strengthened the foundation for the next campaign. A European kingdom might win a great war and come home exhausted and poor. The Ottomans often came home richer. Is that not wild? War as a profitable enterprise, not for a company, but for an entire civilization. And the geography made it even more powerful. The Ottoman Empire straddled the Bosphorus, the eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the overland caravan routes to Persia and Central Asia. You want to move goods from Europe to Asia? You're going through the Ottomans. There's no alternative. They owned the choke point. Beyond geography and military design, the Ottomans built additional financial tools that locked in their stability. State monopolies, salt, tobacco, coffee, sometimes even soap. Everyday essentials that people had to buy regardless of what was happening in the world. The state controlled their production and sale, which meant predictable, reliable income flowing straight into the treasury. Does that sound familiar? It should. Saudi Arabia's oil, Russia's gas pipelines, the Suez Canal. Every major power has a revenue anchor, something so essential that the money flows no matter what. The Ottomans were the medieval version of that anchor. They also used tributary states. Crimea, Wallachia, and other regions paid annual sums to the Ottoman treasury in exchange for protection or autonomy. It was cheaper than governing these places directly, and the income funded soldiers, roads, fortresses, and fleets. And here's the really remarkable thing. For centuries, the empire barely needed to borrow money at all. No national debt spiral, no foreign lenders dictating terms, no bond markets draining the treasury. They lived within their means, which, looking at most modern governments, sounds like science fiction. But nothing lasts forever. By the late 1600s and into the 1700s, the world shifted under the Ottomans' feet. European powers industrialized, new military technologies emerged, and this is the killer: trade routes shifted. Oceanic shipping around Africa began bypassing the Ottoman land routes entirely. The caravans that had funded centuries of campaigns started thinning out. The Timar system decayed, local tax holders became corrupt, central oversight weakened, soldiers grew unreliable, and the Janissaries? Over the centuries, they had accumulated wealth, political influence, and privileges until they became essentially a state within a state. They became one of the greatest obstacles to the modernization that could have saved the empire. When the empire finally began transitioning to European-style professional armies, it needed something it had spent centuries avoiding: cash salaries. Lots of them. And to fund those, it turned to something even more dangerous: foreign loans. In the 1800s, the Ottomans began borrowing heavily from European banks at high interest rates. The same powers the empire had once outmaneuvered now controlled its finances. Debt spiraled, payments fell behind, and in 1881, the Ottoman government was forced to hand over control of its finances to an international commission run by France and Britain. 6 centuries of financial independence gone. It's a familiar story, isn't it? A great power rises on financial discipline, builds innovative systems, ignores the early warning signs, and collapses when the economics finally stop working. Now, here's the part that should make you genuinely uncomfortable. The same mechanisms are still running today, just in modern clothes. The old Timar system? That's government contracts and privatized military logistics. Modern states outsource massive portions of their military operations to private companies, cutting direct payroll costs. Same logic, different century. Trade tolls. The modern version is the global struggle over shipping lanes and energy choke points, the Strait of Hormuz, the South China Sea. Whoever controls those routes controls the revenue passing through them. The Ottoman Empire would recognize this immediately. State monopolies live on through national oil companies and sovereign wealth funds. Saudi Aramco plays the exact same role the Ottoman salt monopoly once did, just on a scale of trillions instead of millions. Conquest paying for conquest still exists. Countries pursue territory and influence not for glory, but for energy reserves, rare minerals, pipelines, and geographic leverage. And late-stage borrowing, the thing that finally broke the Ottomans, echoes in every modern debt crisis you've ever read about: Argentina, Greece, the ongoing debate about U.S. national debt. The financial logic of empire doesn't change. The uniforms do. So what's the actual lesson here? Empires don't die on the battlefield. They die on the balance sheet. The Ottomans survived 6 centuries because their financial system was disciplined, efficient, and brilliantly engineered to make war pay for itself. They collapsed when that system broke, when trade routes shifted, when soldiers became expensive, and when they borrowed so much that foreign creditors effectively owned their future. The real warning in their story isn't military, it's financial. Systems can sustain power for centuries, right up until the day they can't. And when they stop working, they don't send a warning letter. They just stop. Thanks for listening this far.